everybody, and welcome. It's really wonderful to see that we have such a large audience interested in housing that doesn't have a housing ministry and no housing policy to speak of. So I'm very delighted on behalf of the Social Justice and the Cities program to welcome you all tonight for an event that we're organizing in partnership with the Université de Caen, with colleagues from the Université de Caen. I'll just say a couple of words about the Santis Institute and our place as a program in the Institute before I leave the floor for the lecturers. For those of you who don't know, the Social Justice and the City program was started a couple of years ago here at the Santis Institute. The Institute was founded a few years earlier with the idea of bringing work and research that's conducted by colleagues in the university, faculty members, to the public realm in a way to influence public policy making. So the idea is there's so much good research that is happening, but no one is using it. It's not actually changing public policy making. So the Institute was founded with the idea that we could influence public policy by bringing this research to decision makers. When we started social justice, we started with an observation that very often decision makers were not interested with the research we were producing. Those who were very interested were advocacy groups and NGOs that are trying to make a change. So, can speak loud. So basically, what we tried to do is to say, instead of partnering with public policymakers directly, we're going to look for advocacy groups, for NGOs that are trying to make a difference, however they are, whoever they are, and we will try to feed them with the research, work with them in partnership to produce research that can influence public policy making. It does not mean that we don't talk to public policy makers. Yesterday, Social Justice and the City was hosting, in fact, in partnership with Public Works, a closed workshop with several decision makers in the housing sector, trying to initiate a conversation about what an affordable housing policy would be for the city of Beirut. But we continue to work in partnership with NGOs, with other research labs, with advocacy groups, trying to really make a difference by producing the research they need in their work. So that's social justice, and housing figures very high on our agenda because we feel that it's a sector of public policy making that really has very few public champions. There has been no serious policy making with regard to housing. The sector is addressed from the perspective of public finance, so there's a lot of influence from the public sector, particularly from the central bank, on how housing works, without thinking about social housing. Similarly with the rent control, those of you who are familiar, that is very much dealt with from a framework of capital investment and landlord rights, and not from issues of affordability and thinking about urban social inclusion. So from that perspective, Social Justice is absolutely delighted tonight to welcome our colleagues from the Université de Caen and from the University of Sao Paulo, I think. And so we are really delighted to welcome you to hear more about experiences elsewhere. And we're very proud to have Marieke Kruijnen act as the discussant on behalf of our program. Marieke is a postdoctoral fellow at the Orient Institute in Beirut right now. Her interests center around the geographies of capital investment in the built environment, and I should say she wrote a fabulous dissertation about Beirut. We're all looking forward to the book when it comes out, linking the banking sector to transformations in the housing sector and urban gentrification in several neighborhoods of Beirut. She's currently researching the increasing connections between real estate and finance in the Middle East. She was also teaching at AUB here in our Department of Architecture, Urban Theory last fall, and it was wonderful to have her around and have her input for social justice. I'll leave the floor now to my colleagues to present your programs, and then Marieke will take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. Okay, so first I'm going to ask Professor Bergel to introduce his program.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Pierre Bergel, professor of social and urban geography at the University of Caen in France, in the western part of France. First, let me warmly thank the American University of Beirut and the Santis Institute for your invitation. We are all very happy of this collaboration between IFI and ESO that we are launching with this seminar. It's okay. We are also very happy to discover Lebanon, which is the first time for me, and spend time in your country. Also, a special thanks to Mona Fawaz and also Marika Krinen and also Dunia Salame, and also to the communication staff, which has a lot. Which made a lot. Now, some words about ESO, thank you. ESO, it's a research laboratory, a French research laboratory, which means Espace et Société, Spaces and Society, and it was founded in the early 1980s. We are a research center gathering research labs from 5 universities located in the western part of France, as you can see on this map. I'm a geographer, excuse me. Present you some maps. Caen, Le Mans, Nantes, Rennes, and Angers. At its inception, our research center both. At its inception, our research center was dedicated to a certain form of social geography, widely inspired by a Marxist approach known amongst French geographers at the time as Géographie sociale de la France de l'Ouest, in one word, social geography from the western part of France. But with the continued support of the CNRS, Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in France, it's now an interdisciplinary and multi-centered research center. Besides geography, our research includes town planning, urban studies, public policies, territorial practices, sociology, and economics amongst other subjects. Next one, please. Gathering 119 researchers, 116 PhD students, and 30 associates, is a researcher with a diversity and numbers. Nevertheless, all focus on one focus, the spatial dimension of societies, divided in 4 different research axes. Next, please. Thank you. I read it in French, production, différenciation et partage de l'espace, but you can see the translation on the slide. Pratique, expérience et représentation de l'espace, la construction spatialisée de l'action publique, public action between ordinary and institutional, théorie and at last, and théorie, interdisciplinarité, method, excuse me. Research surrounding social justice is present in 2 of the 3 research axes. In the first axis, social justice is approached from the point of view of social-spatial segregations, access to public services, gender inequalities, and so on, etc. In the third axis, social justice is understood as a product of public policies and also as an aim for social and political protests. Nicolas Bottes and I will focus on this specific approach today, along with our Brazilian colleague Gabrielle Feltran, who will introduce, I guess, his research lab shortly. I do your job, excuse me.
That's good, that's fine.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, and thanks for the invitation. I would like to thank Nicolas and Mona and Dima and all my colleagues and the organizers for this possibility of sharing our research. About my research center, it's called Center for Metropolitan Studies based in São Paulo, in the University of São Paulo, and I'm also a professor in the University of São Carlos, that is 200 kilometers north from São Paulo. I'm now a scientific director of this center. We are lucky there in Brazil, in this moment of our country, to have like stability of funding from the state of São Paulo, the FAPESP Foundation, who's the public foundation to improve the access to research, and also to try to link research with international audiences and then to decision makers in Brazil. So we have a kind of mixed center between doing research and doing advocacy in many issues and many dimensions related to inequalities in Brazil. So we are finishing a project of 10 years long, and then we are starting next year another 10 years long project. So we are very lucky in these times of instability in our country to have this possibility of sharing our researches with a lot of colleagues in Latin America, in Europe, United States, and now here. It's also my first time here, and we are working there strongly in many dimensions of inequalities in public policies. It means education, health, social services, housing, violence, crime, public safety, and so on. So to introduce, I think it's like more or less like that, and the contact I will show you in the end of my talk. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to start with our first speaker, which is Professor Bergel, who is Professor of Social and Urban Geography at the University of Caen Normandy and a research fellow at the CNRS Research Unit ESO Caen that was just introduced. So his work is focusing mainly on urban destruction and reconstruction, urban public policies and town planning, and urban inequalities and segregation. His research is based on fieldwork carried out mostly in France, Germany, and Algeria. So to you the floor. I will open the presentation. Whenever I have to...
I will... I'm sorry. Who cares about the residents? Social justice, eviction from informal settlements, and urban modernization in Constantine, Algeria, between 2008 and 2015. Next one, please. Constantine is the third largest city in Algeria, situated to the east part of the country. I could show you that here. Constantine is around here, this little circle here, close to the Tunisian border, with a population of 800,000. Since the early 21st century, the urban area is affected by a huge urban modernization. The city center has gradually been rid of its informal settlements, adapting to contemporary mobility. Maybe I have got to be closer. Or at the same time, the new city of Ali Menjali, I will speak later of this new town, southeast of the periphery, has emerged to host populations and activities transferred from the dedensified center. Next one, please. The observable mutations in Constantine are complex and do not fall under the usual categories. The situation cannot be compared to a classic case of urban regeneration because demolitions have not been accompanied by same-place reconstructions, as you see also later. Neither is it a situation of displacement of population, an ordinary event in the city of the south, because authorities promote ambitious strategies of social justice and housing rights. At the same time, we can question the real content of this urban project because the changing situation have played an important role throughout the process. At the end of the 1990s, and the beginning of these operations, civil peace after the Black Decades, which decades is called by Algerian people, it was 10 years of terrorism and civil war, also benefits from oil extraction at this time, encouraged the state to modernize 4 major cities in Algeria, including Constantine. In the case of Constantine, the personal will and action of the wali, it means a local governor, complemented this modernization effort starting mid-2000s. With the start of the Arab Spring in Egypt and nearby in Tunisia, in early 2011, the process came nevertheless to an abrupt stop. The Constantine modernization process generated many reports, roundtable and conferences and so on, about the future of the city. But the population's displacement, therefore, although at a large scale during the period, and especially between 2008 and 2015, was not succeeded by any practical urban planning. As justification, authorities have forwarded the argument of free replacement as a guarantee for social justice and satisfaction, without the necessity of any participatory approaches. Field interviews and research into media and institutional documentation managed with my Algerian colleague Brahim Ben Laklef have shown otherwise, though displaced dwellers feel left out by a process that is neither just nor comfortable in their eyes, and that has clearly produced their resentment for authorities. Ever since, these authoritarian actions have produced an atmosphere of caution in these areas of the displaced population that has translated into instability and chronic violence. Next one, please. First, urban project in Constantine prioritizing infrastructure. You must know first that the historic city of Constantine lies mainly on a hill, surrounded by 100 meters deep cliffs, as you can see here on this photo, from this picture here, and also here. So it's very deep cliff on three of the four sides of the historic city. So it's a challenge to modern the city for automobile circulation infrastructures. This idea of modernizing the city, in other words, making it circulation friendly, is a recurrent theme in urban policies of the independent Algeria in 1962. Until the early 2000s, though, this idea does not succeed, and major demographic growth is only seen in new neighboring suburbs growing at a distance from the historic center in a process of todification. You can see one of these suburbs here. It's about 3 or 4 kilometers up north to the historic center of the city. Next one, please. So this Renewal Valley, the river down in the valley is called Renewal. The Renewal Valley is a challenging space. The context changed starting 2006 and between 2006 and 2007, when the Wali, so the local governor, decided to demolish 3 informal housing sites called Bardo, Jenenchina, garden of oranges garden, I guess in Arabic, maybe. Jenenchina and Avenue de Roumanie in French, Roumanie Avenue, facing and in contrast in the whole city. These 3 sites marked the entrance of the unoccupied Renewal Valley sector. Although informal, these districts were quite different from slum areas, and they were considered at this time among the oldest of the city. Before its demolition, the Bardo site was made up of 350 buildings housing over 1,100 families. On the other side of the river, the Jenenchina area was constructed below the Sidi Rashid Bridge, which is an old bridge we saw before, but it's not so important. These first constructions date early 1950s, built by populations who mass migrated from rural areas at this time. Also on the right bank, the third one, the Avenue de Roumanie Informal Settlement, was an extension of the Jenenchina. Before its demolition in 1910, 690 families settled here, 2 mosques and a primary school. The demolition of these 3 sites was motivated by infrastructure projects, as I said, which began to service Constantine in the early 2000s. 4 major projects slowly began transforming the Valley of Renewal into a vital site for the continuation of urban development. Between 2006 and 2008, a cable car connecting the old city to the eastern peripheries was constructed, along with a new bridge, Trans-Renewal Bridge, which overhung the 3 demolished sites. A north-south tramway line was also designed to link the center and the new city of Ali Menjali, and has been under construction since the early 2000s. Now some photos. Next one, please. You can see the 3 informal settlements, which here, and also Avenue de Roumanie is here. The name is not inscribed here. The new Trans-Renewal Bridge here. Next one, please. You can see the cable car from the historic city to the eastern part of the city. And next one, the tram line from the historic center. The Place de la Brèche is a main place for the historic center of the city, to University, and south to the new town of Ali Menjali. On this process, next one please, the Wali, local governor, had a central role in the demolition of the informal settlements. The Wali implements in Algeria national policy as dictated by the government, because Algeria has conserved a very centralized political administration. The Wali heading public budget of over 400 million Algerian dinar. You can see it's the equivalent for 23 tram lines which were built in Constantina. So it's a huge mass of money. And the Wali supervise all like a private entrepreneur. Starting 2008, the three sites of Bardo, Jenencina and Avenue de Roumanie were demolished. The Wali plays so a central role in these demolitions, leaning on academic models and a network of players which he had injected gradually in the local political debate. So next one, in the part 2, we'll see the terms of this local, also international and local debates. First, the Wali benefits from two external models. First one is an economic model, the attractive and competitive city, therefore construction of congress centers, international hotel, exposition halls and trading malls and so on take way at this time. The second external model was an architectural one, also follows that of Dubai, a city that fascinates the Algerian elite and minority rising middle class. One architect's non-commissioned design went as far as imagining a futuristic city liberally over the informal settlements of Renewal. Even though his sketches were not realized, it were widely propagated by the media. We can see it on the next slide. You see the Renewal Valley, as you've seen before, and now fortunately, it was not built. It was in 2008, as you can see, 2008. Back to. Thank you. Also, the Wali benefits of three local deals. First deal, it was a legitimacy granted by the President of the Algerian Republic. From these models, the Wali created an atmosphere favorable to the urban project. And between the fall of 2006 and spring 2007, he commissioned 4 academics with writing a report on the future of metropolitan Constantine area. During several months, the ideas gained track because the report was heavily supported at this time by the President Bouteflika, which was and still is the President of the Algerian Republic. And he also made a visit in Constantine on April 2007. Second deal, an international workshop. In January 2009, an international workshop is organized. World-class architects are invited to Constantine to reflect on the future. Capitalizing on the legitimacy of this workshop, the Wali justified the demolition of the informal site and the displacement of its inhabitants. This demolition is presented as necessary collateral damage in parallel to the construction of the bridge trans-Renewal, even though no urban plow foresaw it. In the next slide, we can see the poster advertising the workshop setup, and this poster set up this necessity. You can see the new bridge here, which is shown above the informal sites of Bardo and Jenencina, in order to highlight the contrast between the modern infrastructure and the misery of the sites it overshadows. Between modernity and poverty, you can see the ancient city here, which is with heritage potential. So for the informal sites, there is no place, and they become so undesirable. Third deal, next slide, thank you. The new city, which potentially liberating central spaces. This new city of Ali Menjeli is 30 square kilometers urbanizable, and in 2011 there were 120,000 dwellers, inhabitants in this city. And at this time, there were constructions of over 1,000 new housing per year. So the wali can relocate the residents of the informal sites, certain dangerous areas, and also cater for the demand of social housing. So next slide, it means that the demolitions and subsequent relocations are prioritized by the locations of new infrastructures. 2, that the transformal bridge thus serves as an alibi. For the first time in a city of independent Algeria, solid housing sites are demolished. Therefore, a national taboo falls. It's a very important thing because it's the first time, and the sole time in the urban history of Algeria since now that solid housing sites were demolished. In this part of the valley of Renewal, the wali acts as though this space were not inhabited. Thus, who cares about the residents? Faced with the indifference of local authorities, the residents have no choice but to take action themselves. So we are following the part 3. And the next slide, thank you. The 3 sites demolished between 2008 and 2010 consisted of 2,825 constructions and 517 families units over 155 hectares. So it's a huge superficie, a huge area. The photo taken before and after the operations show the extent of the destruction. Yeah, first one is Avenue de Roumanie, before and after demolition. No comment. I think you don't need any comments about that. You can see before demolition and after, so it's totally empty. The next is Cité du Bardo, which was destroyed in 2008. 1,100 families were dislodged. You can see only here. You can see only the mosque, which is stayed, and the next one is the same area of Bardo in 2011. You can see also the mosque. There were brutality of eviction methods. Next one, please. That the national press regularly shows because authority show no concern for the residents' well-being. The chosen dates for demolition, as an example, were largely criticized as they coincided with Ramadan and the beginning of the school year. Cartoonists also have their fair share of material to work with, staging the general feeling of the victimized population. As you can see here, you see financial appetites for this area. Next one, please. But the conflicts had a complex geometry. The resistance of residents generates confrontation with the police in 2008 and 2009, and the level of violence remained globally moderate, but with high levels of tensions. Mild wounds were registered on both sides, and an elderly man died of an heart attack at the time of his relocation. The office director for the Wali was also wounded during a face-off with angry dissidents. Even though strongly mobilized, the residents of the 3 sites were not successful, because the latter did not shy of using the police force with all its power and organize the operation in military fashion. Demolish by sector to fraction protest, preventively secure the relevant perimeters, rapidly demolish the housing and immediately relocate the population by means of trucks especially brought in for the job. And also the failure of the protest revealed the internal divisions within the residents group. The first division, as you can see here, is between owners and tenants. The latter benefiting from the expulsion as their new housing was newer for less cost. In this category, the tenants of the Avenue de Roumanie believed that they were in the best position. Another division was revealed amongst the group of tenants. Those who had any proof of ownership before 1971, even informal, were indemnified, while those with paperwork dating to 1971 were only given a new residence with no other indemnity. So DAS residents were relocated for nothing. The ambitious metropolitan project communicated by the Wali of Constantine was inexplicably stopped in 2009, so 2 years before the beginning of Arab Springs, at the time when the President of the Republic retracts its support. The project was relabeled and at a smaller scale. The major constructions still continued, cable car, bridge, and so on, but were no longer part of a larger scale urban process, it's okay, which existed even with its weaknesses. Taking position in 2010, the new Wali took a more classic path. On the next picture, took by Brahim Ben Laklef, my colleague, on Sunday, it was quite fresh. You can see the Trans-Remel Bridge, which is now built. You can see also that the left bank has been landscaped as a public park. You can see here and mainly here. And there is also, we can see them here, there is also small bridges we are built for promenade. So this area was designed only for a public urban park. Urban regeneration finally completed looks very far from initial dream of global modernization. So, since 2010, the new Wali's priority became the de-ghettoization of the slum poorest areas. The new Wali immediately relocated 900 families from the site on the peripheries. So, let's go to the conclusion. Visions, next one, yeah. Visions of a globalized and attractive city seems to have left the Constantine horizon. The displacement operations have not yet served any planned transformation project. With the Arab Spring of 2011, demolitions had been completely stopped preventively to avoid political contestations or turmoil. Further away from sites already demolished, other informal settlements thus remain untouched, even though they had been scheduled for demolition. In Constantine, the Wali, the former Wali, acted alone, and when he was silenced, no institution was capable to figure out the balance sheets of the operations, which had been commissioned, even though the budgets were enormous. For instance, no one knows how much have cost the construction of the Trans-Remel Bridge, nor for the demolition of 3 informal settlement sites, nor for the indemnities paid to owners, etc. The calculation of the provisional budget of potential projects in the Remel Valley are even more vague. From start to finish, the residents were superfluous or collateral in a chaotic project, and it is this total disregard for them that has been the main case of its failure. The Wali's action, even though brutal, could not pave the way to a comprehensive urban project, of which the agglomeration is still in dire need. Next one, please, and the last one. Nothing fruitful came out of the traumatism of this displacement, of the displacement of the residents. They have been placed farther away from the city center, which had been able to reach on foot, before. They have also been placed far from their job locations and shops they have been accustomed to. Their former residents, poor but comfortable and eventful districts, were transformed into green recycled grounds where it is difficult to imagine a future now. The urgency with which displacements were implemented has furthermore brought together communities from different informal settlements in Constantine. Inside the Newton or Valley Menjali, conflicts are recurrent for the control of parking spaces or for the placement of informal shops. In 2014 and 2015, the violence reached a new height. Urban riots erupted and opposed youth to the police force, thus planting chaos in certain parts of the new city. It's another story, maybe, perhaps, for another presentation. Thank you very much. You can see in the next some reference from Brahim Ben Laklef and I, and some wider reference on the next slide, but we can see after.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce Professor Nicolas Baudet. Am I pronouncing that? Baudet, sorry. Who is an assistant professor of geography at the University of Caen Normandy, attached to the Space and Society laboratory as well, that was introduced just now. So he's also a research associate at the Center for South Asian Studies, right? So his research is concerned with urban social dynamics and informal politics, and he is especially interested in the local fabric of urban government, focusing on informal politics and urban activism. He mainly works in Indian and Brazilian cities conducting comparative research. So let me open your presentation. And whenever I...
Thanks a lot. Thanking again everybody, and especially Mona and you and Dima, because without you I won't be here, and also for the confidence and all your sympathy all over our itinerary. So very happy. My contribution will be slightly different because after being working from 2004 till recently in both India and Brazil, I did a PhD in India, and then I shifted in postdoctoral in Brazil. I've been in and out to Rio and Mumbai to conduct research at two levels. First is following the procedures implementation of urban neoliberal projects, trying to understand the way the policies, the categories, the norms, and how they were implemented de facto on the field. And then the second aspect I was interested in how activism was part of the was a major stake in the implementation of this such urban policies. So it's a bit far from the direct question of social injustice. I've been working mainly in this area in publishing other things, but I try today to focus mainly on a reflection that which I extracted from the fields since all over the years. Two fields are following. I'm following there. I will present it briefly, and so I'm sorry because I want to be able to present all the context and the public policies to focus more on urban activism and trying to develop some things about that. Two fields will be mobilized, and I think one more than the other. First is Morro da Providência, presented as the first favela of Rio de Janeiro, included recently in the perimeter of the major urban intervention called Porto Maravilha, which was defined by governments and at different scales to host the Olympic Games. And another is an area in Bombay, which was very close to industrial area, and where Dharavi, the main slum of Dharavi, is hosting more than 800,000 people, and another small slum called Merampara. In these two places, I've been regularly every year or two, a year in Rio, several months sometimes, with some irregularities, but with the same preoccupation that time will help me to follow some lines, the lines of the local power games of power, including that of urban activism. So my point of observation is based on the understanding of how urban space, especially in popular neighborhoods, are in the two cases governed by public policies. Public, we could discuss about it, but also by day-to-day politics, elaborated from different scales, several scales, mixed scales, and through complex games of power, both formal and informal. A major part of the work I've been conducting aims at contributing to analyze the logics of political process emerging from the local, while being attentive to a large spectrum of political practices, from micropolitics to what Chatterjee calls poor people politics or day-to-day politics, or more recently in another discipline, what Michel Offerlé refers to as politics without looking like it. I focus my attention on the postures, practice, and power games, which structure the tribulation of these two localities. Two localities involved since last decades, more clearly since the 80s, by a succession, some people talk a tonic of urban intervention, which are slum upgrading programs, slum rehabilitation schemes, or renovation or renewal programs that bring some have some consequences, brutal consequence on families, forced resettlements, evictions, and all that. I won't focus on that specifically, so to refer more precisely on the games of power implemented through urban activism. So my 2 points, which will be some general statements to put urban activism into politics. And this is starting from a reflection point that if many of the scholars work about the games of actors, complex games of actors around public policies, and many works denounce the brutality of states, to go very fast. Few words address specifically the question of urban activism in itself, but few of them only are addressing urban activism as a tool to understand the configuration of local politics in itself. There are exceptions, of course. I will quote some of them, but urban activism not as an isolated process, systems of power, but included into local politics with the permeability of categories, with permeability with states, and all that. Mona is not included in the few work because she is also working on that. And I should call also the very interesting work of Lisa Weinstein. But majority of urban academics and urban activists are not very much questioned through sociology of militancy. And I'm not a sociologist, so I feel free to say that. My objective then is to figure out how the main features of multi-positioning and modes of action undertaken by urban activists are differently getting translated into social and political arrangement. Arrangement which reveal how politics is locally produced from the encounter of heterogeneous groups and action, all of them claiming being in search of justice. If two fields are taken as a base for empirical investigation, my contribution appear more like an invitation to your point of view, because I felt somehow reading things that what I could observe in Bombay could be easily transferred, questioned here in Lebanon. So you can go. So the first step to explore is the systematization of urban intervention in popular neighborhoods, which is growing since the 80s and 90s, involving different bodies of public powers. From the 1990s onwards, more clearly between the 90s and 2000, under impulsion of Bretton Woods institutions and through mineral goals for development, slums are receiving numerous programs of renewal. And everybody knows that, but I will show this for the cases I am interested in. Rio is hosting since the 1994 a major programs of urban renewal called Favela Bairro, which was settled at these different scales from federal to local government. And slowly, it included one tenth of the urban slums of Rio. In 2010, when the program was achieved and when the envelopes were closed, 147 favelas out of 650 had hosted that kind of upscaling program without being the object of amélioration, upgrade, improvement in the social lives. But that's another question. You can go. You can go again. And among the favelas concerned by this Favela Bairro program lies the field I've been following since 2005, which is Morro da Providência. And you can go. It's a hill locally centrated, very much presented as urban myth as the first favela of Rio de Janeiro, and from Favela Bairro, maybe 10 urban projects were settled there. One of them, including urban as the major implementation of Favela Bairro was on infrastructure, upgrading all networks and facilities. It was the only to host a program of heritage conservation. As you can see, this old capella was to be transformed into a colonial. Into the model of a colonial, very little village in the heart of Rio, at the perspective of the 2016 Olympics. Of course, this didn't happen, even though investment were done. Players were informing, diffusing discourses about that, but it never happened. Why? Because the Games of Power didn't decide, or did decide a different way. In Bombay, the same kind of characteristic features of the fields I've been working. Very centrally located, slums very powerful in terms of mediation and images, very central in the metropolis, very full of expectation around land investment. Dharavi, everybody I think knows about Bombay. It's the biggest slum in Bombay, and also a major discourse of urban upgrading, transforming Mumbai into Shanghai, and creating out of it the question of slums, a world-class slum in a world-class city. Many people, many academics worked about this paradox, but it had many links with it had many very common features in terms of their neoliberal aspect, their willing of attracting attracting investor, and bringing land into upper class middle class housing. So that's the two questions, the two fields I've been questioning things. You can. So the landscape around Dharavi and Berampada transform itself, but very slowly, as the first project was also not very good implemented. Sorry, you can go again. These are the expressions of the transformation and the upgrading, where classically you can go back. You can see that public bodies implement by stages project without having the landscape that is be publicized. Again and again. So in that context of neoliberal, very powerful project, you can stay here. You can stay here. My aim is to approach with to get a close look on urban activism. To focus attention on the milieu and the dynamics of activism, I am proposing to understand it as a multifarious interpretation. The observation have been made in both on ongoing projects and trajectory of activism led me to try to surpass the common dualism opposing global and local activism, progressive and contestatory, advocacy groups, and grassroots development bodies. To propose, due to the fragmentation of causes, due to the permeability of actors, another set of analyzing the current waves of activism. So, if activism appear in fact as a myriad of actors permanently renegotiating their place, following complex and somehow strategies very delicate to precise, then I could address it in two dimensions. First is addressing to activism from the field as is day-to-day expression. That will we represent now. And go again because I think I'm late. Yeah. Only 5 minutes. Okay. So I will. I lost myself, of course. I will just illustrate in this part using two different ways of restituting some elements to empirically element the reflection. You can go. First, some narratives extracting from investigation in Morro da Providência. And then a set of story that concerned the favela and the favela politics around urban upgrading, starting from July 2005 and divided in 4 moments. What I call political moments, after Jacques Rancière's way to express. The political moment first, you can go, is a description of an observation made where official delegation arrived from away from the main entrance of the favela to inaugurate the program Favela Bairro, which I present rapidly, very fast, and it's the main entrance of the favela. I came in the other way, by the other way, you can see the lines red. I came the other side, and when I entered the favela, I came across narco traffickers armed in the roof, and on the other side, the police was there. And in the middle of this square, this very important square, the inauguration took place with the mayor at the beginning, and the chief secretary of municipality got angry and said, I was very clear, the police have to leave. So police left, and the mayor could start the inauguration. You can go. So I tried to design a bit what happened, and very surprising me. I said it's an official inauguration, the project is ready, and then something is wrong, something I don't understand. Armed traffickers. The mayor here, the mayor and its surrounding, and the police left. There is a social arrangement I didn't know. I came to know it afterwards. You can go. Following the itinerary, we stopped on a Mirante Belvedere that has been constructed by the occasion and under the upgrading project. And I noticed afterwards, after having took this photo, that there are 2 lines here, 2 barriers. The first, a week ago, the construction did this barrier, and for 6 days, the place was surrounded by armed traffickers, saying the municipality won't enter here, they won't come, unless they change this, because it's very dangerous for our kids. So the municipality implemented the order and constructed a barrier higher. Another way that led me to say, for the inauguration to take place, it hasn't been necessary to a social arrangement. I didn't understand. Then I came to understand after. Second moment. Can go. A young activist called JR did an implementation in the favela. A major intervention. He entered without any precaution in the field, without negotiating with anybody, and then got the people with him to put these photos of women. And then when the media came, very attracted by the event, he left. And by leaving, he also did an inauguration on the same place, on the same square, very central of the favela. Yeah. So I've been invited in this event, and JR, the artist, was there, surrounded by traffic dealers with armed Kalashnikov around, and in the playground were playing football, and everybody was happening. And at the same place where the police is always staying, the police were there. The representative of the French consulate were there. They were here to finance further the work of this artist activist, and they did this for the Nuit Blanche later on and for a big exhibition in Rio. Then another moment, very interesting. So I'm asking myself, urban activism, where it is? Where lies urban activism? A third political moment. This square, the same place, was to be transformed under another project, more recent, Mora Carioca, into a place to host a cable car, major infrastructure. And as the mobilization, the contestation of the people were high, I was asking people around, what do you think about it? And an old man, 70 years old, told me, look, I've been fighting against the construction of the playground 15 years ago, because the playground was forced by drug dealers. And we used to sit here and in front of a tree and, working and relaxing on the fresh air. And after that, and now, activists, they are fighting against the destruction of what they call a public space. And the public space is imposed by drug dealers that they use for their everyday economy. And another kind of paradox in the same area was another situation that relies also on activism, artistic. Portuguese artist called Wills, was acting to draw these faces, and they are the faces of the eviction. Faces of eviction, he called that. And I was asking asking a guy in the street. He was a bit drunk, but still answered my questions. And he told me, "This guy is an asshole. This guy, I have to go every day on the same place, and I have to meet him." And he negotiated with the government. He was paid to get another house under the procedure. I am always pressured by municipality. And the artist come here and he put the face of this guy every day in my face. He was very angry. So I say, urban activism is also about this. And the last moment, and then I won't conclude. And that's another expression, the other one. Then the mobilization comes very high. You can go, and the people wanting to defend their place, their square, again, and finally the cable car came and destroyed the playground, and the last interviews I made was one of the person having a material construction shop around the cable car place, and he was to be evicted a few months after. I've been here a long time. At the corner of the street, I forgot to say, this guy interviewing, he started to play the guitar and sing. So this is a song, I won't sing it, but I've been here for a long time. At the corner of the street, at the corner of life, at the corner of glances. He was in the middle of crossfired between traffic dealers and police. Having seen this, having played the game. In the game of the without words, in the game of without glances, it is for you that I write, you who still haven't come here. But we will see a different place, without the sound and without the lights, a sad place where the past is ashamed and the present afraid. Again? Nobody, no police, no NGO is able to influence me. That was a talk. Only time will tell us what will happen. What is good for now, I don't know. Who knows what was good before and what will be good in the future? I only know that I am tired of this square. I'm the sacoche of this. You let me finish or not?
Well, can you do it in like 1 minute?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Then another local leader of a grassroots local organization, in front of the mobilization, organized a demonstration against the cable car being constructed. And he opened a Facebook group in July 2013. What he didn't know was that in the meanwhile, millions of people were going down the street in Rio, fighting against government corruption and FIFA's norm and all that. And the Facebook group called Interest got black blocs who were going on the street with the contestation movements. They came to know that there was a small mobilization in a small area, in a small favela. And the guy who organized this group of demonstration received last minute a call, say, you shouldn't do this demonstration. I know that could happen something that I don't want this cable car to be destroyed. So if it has something, if you lead something, you keep something on the cable car, you will pay for it. And so Mauricio, this guy was very shocked, and because the phone call was coming from a drug dealer, and the black bloc say, okay, we will destroy everything. And at the end, finally, he tried, he negotiated with the black bloc not to touch everything, but you can do. But still, another one, you can see on the cable car, UPP, o caralho, polícia is fucking hell, and that means that they didn't destroy the cable car, but the police is the enemy. But in the meanwhile, social arrangement showed that drug traffickers were protecting the cable car investment because the municipality had to finish the work in the favela for the economy of drug dealers to follow. So that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Now to our final speaker, Professor Gabrielle de Santis Velteraan. I hope I said that right. Who is professor at the Sociology Department of the Federal University of São Carlos and research coordinator at the Center for Metropolitan Studies. He mainly studies social, urban, poor peripheries, focusing on marginalized groups and crime in São Paulo. And now, at the moment, he is a visiting scholar at the Humboldt University in Berlin. Okay, let me open your presentation. And then you can. Okay.
So, thanks again. I will present a paper, a very general paper on this, on kind of panorama of social transformations in São Paulo when we observe it from a standpoint based in poor neighborhoods of the city since the 60s until today. So it's a huge challenge here to talk about so many things in short time, but I think it could be useful for you to understand more or less the guidelines of this kind of transformations. I'm a field worker. I do ethnographic research since 1997 now, so 20 years now, in São Paulo's outskirts. So Nicolas has talked about Rio. I will talk about São Paulo. We have huge differences and at the same time a lot of coincidences in this kind of transformation. So we could discuss after this kind of particularities. But my argument here is that social conflict in Brazil entangles a lot of multiple dimensions of social inequalities. So I will talk about housing and violence that are completely entangled issues, as Nicolas just told us. But I could also talk about health, education policies, or urban planning, etc. So my argument here is that we have to observe these entanglements, these connections, these relations between issues to try to reach a better understanding of what is happening, and at the same time be able to propose better solutions to these social conflicts. Well, São Paulo grew very quickly in this century. As you can see, it's not well formatted, but you can see from the 50s to the 60s, the metropolis goes from 2 million to 4 million, and then in the 70s to 8 million, and then in the 80s to 12 million. Means a lot. And it was based on if we look from a standpoint of poor neighborhoods and poor families, it is based in a project of social mobility for very poor people coming from rural areas. This project was a family project. And this migration is mostly from the 50s until the 80s. It's mostly internal migrants from the north of the country coming to the big cities of the south part of the country. São Paulo, Rio, Belo Horizonte, and so on. So sometimes 20 or 30% of the population of the northern states of the country were displaced to the south, based in a promise of social mobility, in a promise of modern life, modernization, and industrial work. So industrial work is the basic promise to these families that were large families. In the 50s, we had in Brazil an average of 7 children per woman. In the 70s, it was 5.5 children per woman, and now it's 1.8 in the country, 1.4 in São Paulo state. The promise of work, of industrial work and protected work, social protected work, of course, didn't reach all these families, all these migrants. And if we look at this picture, I love this picture. I didn't know it before, but if we look at this picture, we can see very different faces here that were also maybe a Lebanese or Syrian woman here, because we had in the early 20s a lot of Lebanese migration there in São Paulo. So we have a kind of elite of the, and also Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese migrations also. So we have, in one side, what we called in Brazil the white, like workers, work classes, and then the migrants coming from the north coming to join these workers in a project of social mobility. During the 30s and 40s, and after in the 50s, all social welfare, all state welfare was targeting this white European, Arabic, and Japanese migrants in São Paulo, and the workers coming from the north part of the city, the poorer workers, were unprotected and came to the city without any possibilities of reaching the promised social mobility. So we had a very strong effort during the dictatorship, again, in the 50s and after in the dictatorship in the 60s and 70s, to improve the livelihoods of these white communities, and we so-called white communities there, and the black and northern communities were unprotected to reach their social mobilities. So if we look to a favela in the 60s in São Paulo, it could be like that. She's a very famous writer in the black writer in São Paulo called Carolina de Jesus in the 60s. In the 70s, the settlements were like that. And in the 80s, that was a huge emergence of social protests and social movements there in São Paulo, based on three different actors: Catholic Church doing grassroots movements based on liberation theology, unionism, from where Lula, our former president, was issued, and Marxist professors in the University of São Paulo and other universities. They were all together, like, doing activism and trying to sketch a project of social integration of these peripheries, and housing was the main issue of these movements. We had a lot of health and education movements as well, but housing was at the center, because house was also the center of the possibility of social mobility for these workers, and housing policies were during the 80s in the center of these claims for social rights. In this case, the picture shows original movement against the increasing of the cost of life, but then they will have a lot of movements to formalize informal settlements, to have water, to have electricity, to have very basic social rights guaranteed to these communities. These social movements began to have more and more possibilities of having political power, exactly in the moment that Brazil was finishing the dictatorship in the middle of the 80s. And this woman, called Luísa Erundina, was the first woman to be a mayor in São Paulo, and she was a social assistant that worked with the favelas, and in this time, it was 88 when she was elected mayor. It was really a surprise, because no one knows the political force that favelas had at this moment in São Paulo. It was a quite specific electoral moment at the same time, but she was elected mayor, and all these grassroots movements had the opportunity of, especially housing movements, to be in the municipality and to produce public policies, especially housing policies in this moment. So, and she was a migrant from the north, and a woman, and there was a lot of symbolic space for this kind of transformations and this kind of hope that things were getting better for very poor and black people, and etc. So in her administration, this kind of policies of self-constructed but planned houses were so strong, and there was a lot of production of housing in this moment, collective houses produced by really grassroots movements based on urban outskirts, and it was very famous in São Paulo, and from these projects, many of the activists and urban planners and architects and sociologists and etc. Were discussing this kind of possibility of urbanism to concentrate a little bit more the infrastructure, to make things cheaper and at the same time useful and etc. So a kind of very virtuous project in political and social terms that had been developed in the late 80s and early 90s in São Paulo. At the same time, it was not majority of the housing policies, because the majority of housing settlements were self-constructed and unorganized by unorganized groups. Here is a huge favela in São Paulo that had housing programs, housing projects, but not enough to avoid this kind of self-constructions in the very same land. Here is the favela where I most worked, called Favela do Madalena, Sapopemba. We see that is very heterogeneous. There's so precarious housing here, but more well-established housing. only to demonstrate that the majority of the poor people is also living like in these conditions, even if we had so strong social movements during the 80s and 90s. Here, the transformations I told you, I won't lose my time here, but only to demonstrate how strong was the transformation of all the social dynamics in these neighborhoods. And I will talk a little bit about the crime, because at the same time that we had these political transformations based in a promise of democratic regime and expansion of social rights for the poor, etc., we had at the same time the arrival of transnational markets, the liberalization of economy, the strong modernization of our markets, and etc., and in a sense, as industrial work had lost its very central position, all the economic transformations and etc. during the 90s, we had an explosion of homicide rates in São Paulo, and it was related for me in two basic dynamics. First one is the arrival of cocaine markets there that was so strong during the early 90s, when everybody in the university, everybody in NGOs, everybody in the government was talking about social rights and the virtues of participation and participative democracy, etc. The rappers in the periphery were talking about the urban Holocaust, So they were. We had in this moment the arrival of cocaine markets and these very poor people that was not able to integrate this project of social democracy and etc. were there to work in this market and to fight themselves and against the police to conquer these territories and the possibility of having money. And that was the first time that very poor people in Brazil had the possibility to earn a lot of money in doing a business, and it was a criminal, an illegal business. So in this moment, during the 90s, we had a strong, very strong increase of homicide rates, and then crime that was something naive or something very small during the 80s became to be also an industrial issue and a very strong movement, and also a normative power in peripheries. And in this moment, during the 90s, the incarceration that was also increasing. As you can see, we multiplied by 6 our incarceration rates in less 20 years. In this moment, inside the prisons, a specific organization called Primeiro Comando da Capital, the first command from São Paulo, was organizing daily life inside prisons, avoiding or punishing the rapes, punishing homicides, and etc., and becoming more and more strong. So here we have a kind of state security policies and then the crime policies that made PCC so strong. I won't lose my time here, but after we can talk about this. But it's important to understand that for every state action, there's a kind of side effect in terms of criminal organization, and PCC became more and more strong inside the prisons until 2001, when there's a mega rebellion in 24 prisons at the same time, and they expanded from inside the prisons to the urban outskirts. And in 2006, we have 3 days of war in the city. PCC killed 45 policemen during a single night, and then the police killed 500 people in a week. So it was very, very strong at this moment. But was the time that PCC was known as a very strong power instance in São Paulo's outskirts. What does it have to see with housing? Everything. Because, in a sense, this identity of workers produced by social movements and etc. is challenged in this morning by this very representation of criminals. So there was a huge transformation in this representation of poor people in São Paulo in this moment, and a delegitimizing of the social movements in a sense. In another sense, we had a quite strong institutionalization of these movements in the Workers' Party that became federal government in 2003. So the Workers' Party produced with the real estate this project that is called Minha Casa Minha Vida, that means my house, my life. And this is a huge project to construct 6 million houses all over the country during the first 6 years of the program. So it means that all the social movements, all the virtual social grassrooted movements became part of this government program. And this program is based on private and real estate funding for social housing. And this is no longer that kind of housing, but this kind of housing, very far from the center of the town, very easy to building companies to construct, and very based on the evictions of central parts of the city, in many cases produced by fires, by criminal fires in these favelas that made a huge polarization, social polarization between governments and favelas, and criminal groups were there to say, we are with you and against the government and against the system, and etc. So here, and I'm finishing, we can see the former president, the governor of São Paulo and maybe candidate next year, and the mayor of my city, São Carlos, where I live, in this this kind of housing that's being constructed there, even if the city has no necessity of having new houses or new neighborhoods. In this neighborhood that is exactly in the side of a favela, 10% of these houses were occupied by people from PCC, from the criminal faction, before the inauguration, before this photo was taken. So we are in all over the country producing new neighborhoods and bringing these new neighborhoods to the control of the PCC. Here you can see 10% to remember me to to talk about it. And only to finish, the argument is that these things are entangled. Political struggles, social transformations, space, and safety and security policies, and etc. These kind of things cannot be thinked in a very splitted way. So we are in the security policies like incarceration, we are producing PCC, and it's so clear. And that was, I was wondering when I was listening to Nicolas, because in São Paulo we have only one major criminal group, and it was produced by the incarceration policies in São Paulo. And at the same time, this kind of housing policies that are completely distinct from the housing policies that were produced by the movements there are also like bringing urban land to criminal groups and etc. And it's not only a side effect, but it's the basis of this thinking about social policies without connecting the very linked dimensions of social life. So thanks too much for this possibility.
Okay, thank you very much. So given that we have to finish at 7, I will try to keep my remarks a bit short so that we can leave enough time for questions and discussions. I wrote like 4 pages, but I don't know how far I'll get, so we'll see. It's I have a bit of a difficult task, to relate all these divergent cases together and try to especially relate it to the Lebanese case, which is, of course, what I'm here to do. I am going to dwell less on the background, I think, because I think most people here know the basics, right? So I will limit my intervention to 3 main focal points, and I will probably say the most about the aspects that I know most about, which is the gentrification of neighborhoods in Beirut, political economy of real estate development, and the financialization of land, and also the ways in which residents are being displaced. So let's provide first some background to the housing crisis in Beirut, which is, it's a global phenomenon, but I think the housing crisis here is especially acute because, as Mona said, there is like absolutely no social policy in place except housing loans from the side of the state to take care of these people who, cannot afford to access housing in the capital at all. So I think in the last decade or so, it probably has become worse because there was a large real estate boom. There were many legal and institutional changes that contributed to an ever more favorable climate for high-end or high-income real estate development, and it severely increased the prices of land and real estate. And existing protections, such as a number of remaining rent-controlled units, are currently being dismantled. So the crisis will get even worse. These rent-controlled units were preserved through an exceptional temporary decree in 1992, when they were liberalizing all the other rental contracts. They preserved, they protected the sitting tenants with the old contracts like this. So today there's around 153,000 affordable housing units in the country, of which around 43,500 are located in Beirut, housing a large number of people. And in 2014, a law was passed to gradually liberate these contracts, risking the eviction at the end of hundreds of thousands of people. So this is where we are today. Now, rents and property prices are very high, as I said. They also have nothing to do with the income of most people. So I took this from the website of Beirut Madinati, the alternative electoral campaign that ran for municipal elections last year, who came up based on, numbers that were provided by a survey, that the average price of an apartment in Beirut in 2015 was $500,000, which is 1,271 times the minimum wage, which is for around $450 a month. So even people who belong solidly to what you could call the middle classes are not able to access housing at all in or close to the capital city, right? So people who have less means, who don't belong to the middle classes, they have to resort to other options in order to house themselves. Either they stay with their parents, or they migrate, or, they live in overcrowded conditions, or all kinds of ways in which people try to house themselves. So it's a very dire social context with this increasing number of people being excluded from housing, especially in the capital. And it's overlaid and maybe exacerbated in a way by the existing sectarian divisions in the country, which is, of course, something that is quite particular to this context compared to the other context that we discussed today. So you don't have this violent crime, you don't have this, police violence, you don't have this kind of things, but you have other things that are dividing the country on top, and that's overlaying and crisscrossing the class divisions that exist and that make everything extra complicated. So, for example, if lower income dwellers are displaced from Beirut, they would go usually to an area of their own sect. So this kind of displacement processes are exacerbating segregation according to sect, right? So if you move to the suburbs, you will go to a Christian or a Shia or a Sunni suburb, usually, if you are of one of those sects. The other thing is that a lot of people are relying on social services that are provided by these kind of political parties. So, in a way, sectarian political parties, let's say, sometimes we have seen that a religious body actually steps in to provide housing. This is quite rare, but it happened, where they use endowed land to construct housing for their constituencies. This has happened, but it's quite rare. And maybe it's interesting to note that the Maronite Church is the largest landowner in the country. Right, so there is a lot of this kind of land available. There's no such thing as liberation theology or stuff like that. But you could say that there are certain religious political forms of services, also of activism. If you look at Hezbollah, for example, it is a form of religious political activism that also seeks to improve the social conditions of people, the conditions that they live in. Whether you like it or not, right? But it's all based also on a political agenda that is, kept in place through this kind of sectarian system. So all this contributes to increasing segregation between the people, and this is why this is also bad. On top of the class inequality that we see, not to mention even the plight of those who are not Lebanese, right? People who don't have Lebanese citizenship, who cannot count on the protection of such political parties, who cannot count on services based on their sect always. So refugees and migrant workers, these populations are often forced to live, in even worse conditions. Okay, so I thought, well, how am I going to do this, So I thought maybe I should just look at 3 points, and they overlap because I'm still conflicted about the difference between informality and illegality and all this kind of things, so we'll see. So first I look at housing and informality, then at housing and the law, and third at housing and the interests of capital. And I try to relate it to the presentations and end with some questions. So first of all, you could say, okay, there is a level of informality in housing provision in Lebanon, in the sense that many times building codes are violated, right? So you have this addition of floors, or building too much according to the zoning code, building without a proper permit, all kinds of things. But we see less the occupation of state-owned land, for example, or squatting land. You see that less, right? Less than in the cases that we discussed. There is not that much state-owned land. So as far as I'm aware, it's not my specialty, informal settlements. Mona knows more about it. Informal settlements are usually not built on squatted land, right? And also what is different is that these kind of informal settlements are usually not targeted by these large-scale removal programs, these large-scale evictions, where residents are being relocated to, state-provided alternative housing. That does not happen. It was going to happen with the Elisard project in the early 2000s, but that didn't happen because of the existing political system that got in the way and because of several interests. So there is no construction at all from the state side provided for lower income housing. At the same time, informality means maybe something different than what, than this kind of large-scale settlements that are, squatting land, and so it's maybe more. It can be found in the violations of the building code and things like that. So informal housing is usually not targeted for this kind of large-scale removal, but it's neither legalized always. It's usually merely tolerated. It depends what kind of informality you're talking about. So if you look at this example of the Eden Rock Resort, which is being built on the Ramat El Baida beach, you could say, okay, this is, many times these kind of high-end resorts, they also commit all kinds of transgressions that are then legalized in retrospect, or that are then, at the end, sometimes in this case it was rejected. This construction had to be stopped by order of the court, and then the court withdrew its decision. It's on the beach. You're not allowed to build on the coast. You're not allowed to privatize the coast, actually. So in this way, it depends, who is allowed to do these things and who is merely tolerated, and for whom are these things legalized. So it really depends on the position of the people and the kind of political representation that they might have to enforce these kind of legalizations. So this is what Mona Fawaz has also argued in her work, that the informal practices of the poor are merely tolerated on an exceptional basis, let's say, so that it can always be, rescinded, this kind of temporary right. I'll not dwell on that. So this kind of brings me to the second dimension, housing and the law, where we can see that the legal framework in place is also a tool that's used by very powerful agents to lay claim to the city in several ways and to expel its poor residents at the end. So for many in this room, the gentrification of Beirut is probably, you see it. You see that a lot of lower income housing and lower income uses are being replaced by higher income ones, which is the main definition of gentrification. However, that does not just happen like that. In order for that to happen, there needs to be a legal framework that allows for this to happen and that provides the tools for you to do the property transactions, buy out the tenants, go to court, negotiate the compensation. So there's a whole array of legal tools in place, as well as illegal practices of threatening residents, cutting off their water. On top of that, there is also a lot of legal tools that serve these kinds of urban transformations in the interests of the rich, let's say, or in the interests of capital investors. Okay. So, for example, in the Mar Michael neighborhood, you see that, in this legal framework, I just have the real estate prices in Mar Michael. I didn't put a picture of the neighborhood itself. You just see, the kind of increase in prices that happened during this real estate boom, which, of course, means that investors are willing to pay large sums of money for the land. And it creates a large incentive for owners to sell their plots to developers, logically speaking. But we should remember that the building law actually allows for this kind of large-scale developments to take place, right? So the zoning and the regulations in place actually allow for these kind of high towers to be built. So it plays a very important role. So, in the absence of any, just solution for the remaining rent-controlled units, which, a lot of them are located in these low-rise buildings, a lot of landowners will be happy to sell. It's, however, not that simple. Many times these buildings are owned by over 30 shareholders who have inherited the building over time, right? So a developer could track down one shareholder and say, listen, don't you want to sell, and then if he finds someone who is willing, it's always a man, generally. I have to yet meet the first female real estate developer in Lebanon. it might, I'm sure she exists, but all the cases I know it's a man. Anyway, so you can track down a shareholder, right? And say, listen, do you want to sell? And then if the shareholder wants to sell, when the building is still owned in common, let's say, when they haven't divided the property, they can then force a division of the building. So you have another legal tool that helps you to get ahead and obtain these properties, even if not all owners want to sell, right? So I've been working on that with Mona as well. So the remaining shareholders will then be compensated. If their share is large enough to claim an apartment, they will be fine. So if they would be living in an apartment, and their share in the building is large enough, they could stay there. But usually this is not the case. So either they try to obtain enough shares, or they just get a financial compensation and they have to go. So all these other arrangements where family members can live in buildings because the children are abroad, or all this can be destroyed because the law doesn't recognize such settlements, right? This is not recognized. It's just recognized as something financial. And then the developer will negotiate compensation with any remaining tenants. If there are renters, they often have no option but to accept, because they know that in court they might get even a lower compensation. So that's another legal tool. Like if you want to demolish the building, you're allowed to start the process of eviction if you pay compensation. So there's a legal complexity, there's a diversity of legal mechanisms through which the exclusion of people from the city is actually enacted. People who don't have the means to stay, and people who are being pushed out by the high prices and the high potential for profit that exists. So this is where I think Lebanon is different, right? Because I think, contrary to this large-scale and state-led evictions, we see a very gradual process, a very invisible process, a very insidious process where it goes building by building, share by share, lot by lot. It's not one big development, right? And this is very nasty because you don't know, you don't have an overview of what's happening. There's so much that is hidden from the public, right? And there is so much, especially if developers avoid the court and they conduct private negotiations with the tenants. No one will ever know, right? Unless you go and you find out and track down these stories. So efforts are being made to get a better, hold of this kind of data. The Social Justice and the City program is working on it. Public Works Studio is working on it. I wanted to show you this one thing where, they started to map evictions. So you can actually, they created this interactive map where you can upload your own eviction stories. So I just wanted to point that out for a second. Okay, so moving on to the third and final dimension. So the real estate boom that began in the early 2000s, that was related to global flows of capital. So I'm going to keep it short. I'm just going to say it was related mostly to oil or petrodollars from the Gulf, which is another, specifically, let's say, Middle Eastern dimension, perhaps, where, so many cities in the region have been shaped by this kind of capital. And at the same time, in 2008, this boom intensified massively, and you can just see it happening here, right? It's when it reached Mar Mikhail, which is an area which is a bit more towards the east of the city. This is where, when the boom became really intense, they moved towards even further towards the outskirts. So you see how the prices there start to increase like crazy, especially after 2008. So the global financial crisis was actually a boom. It was not a crisis; it was a boom, right? So you see the Eurocentric vision of saying it's a global crisis. No, it's not. It had very different result. It just moved capital around. So what happened is that the Lebanese banking and real estate sectors, they escaped this crisis. They were completely unaffected by it because they were not involved in this kind of practices of, secondary mortgages, derivatives. The demand was in a way real. At least, you know, there was no collapse. There was no mortgage market. There was no such thing. So it became kind of a safe haven for this, not only for petrodollars, but also for a lot of capital coming from, let's say, the West that was escaping this crash and moving south. And I think this is where, you know, it's not only in Lebanon, but it's all over the global south that you see more and more, let's say, informal settlement upgrading programs based on finance-based rehousing programs. So people are, you know, they're taking out loans, and they are starting to take out loans in order to access their alternative or new housing. So in a way, they are then brought into the formal economy, right? And this is especially salient in Latin America as well, I think. So that was not exactly the case here. This kind of money is looking for investments in housing, but as I said, these kind of, you know, informal settlement upgrading programs didn't exist. But what did happen is that a lot of money came into the bank. So you can see here, you know, like the increase in deposits after 2008. It's quite massive. And a lot of these deposits were then actually, when the real estate market slowed a little bit in 2011 and 12, you know, when it had reached its peak and all kinds of external factors also contributed to its slowdown, the banks still had all this money that had to be profitably reinvested somewhere. So what do? Your market is unaffordable for people, for most people. So you offer them the opportunity to take out loans, and at the same time you have a nice outlet for your banking deposits, right? So that's let's say the financialized dimension of this. And you see, I mean, this is not just a little increase. This is exponential, right? This is completely insane. Okay. I think I'll leave it at that. I was going to relate this, but anyway. The crisis, the affordable housing crisis, is directly related to global financial flows and global flows of capital. So we should not forget that. You know, it's not just local dimensions. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll open the floor to questions and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of the presentations. It's eye-opening in each of the instances of what's going on in the different locations. One of the things that strikes me about as a thread of that connects all of these is more the striking imbalance and juxtaposition, if you will, of those who are extraordinarily not enfranchised vis-a-vis government policy or government intervention. And I know that in each of these cities, there's a huge amount of complex political, financial, and other types of interests, which Ms. Kreinen described for the Beirut situation. But I think that what's striking to me is that if one looks at the three other pieces that were presented, it's how disenfranchised groups and the internal workings of those groups cannot, and or had to challenge what was being either imposed upon them or what was occurring to them. In two of the instances, it was the criminal aspects that had a much higher weight than what we would ordinarily think of as community activism. And in the first case, a lot of it was just being disenfranchised by political and historic circumstances. And frankly, part of what I'm curious about is, given the circumstances of the three guests groups, what might have been different that either would have allowed for more of the intervention by the public, or might have allowed for a slightly different a different outcome than did happen.
Answer that?
Yeah.
It's building a little bit on the way Marieke, thank you first for the presentations, very rich case studies, and it's difficult to react on the spot. Like Steve, I was first concerned about the conclusion of all of this. It's just really very, very bleak. So there's really no hope in Beirut, in Algeria, India, or in Brazil. And because I'm trained as a planner and not as a geographer, I always want to look for what can possibly work. And one of the things that I wonder about always when I hear about how bad things are in Brazil is the contrast between how planners write about the introduction of all these new fantastic planning tools that we teach our students about on the one hand, and zones of special social interest, all kinds of inclusionary zoning interventions, some upgrading interventions, the Ministry of City being like a progressive force for change, and on the recognition of the social value of land and the Constitution. And on the other hand, the fact that, yes, on the news, what we see is people being displaced, and you very much confirm this experience. So I'm very interested in thinking about these activist groups that you're describing, particularly you, Nicola, when you describe these groups. Do these tools ever come to work? Do they provide any material for people to activate and use in your context? Thanks.
You want to start? I can.
Okay. Go away.
So, thanks for the questions. Difficult questions. Given the structural conditions we had in the 70s and 80s in our country, in Brazil, I think we had we lost the possibility of having a social democratic state. During the election, the national elections of '89, we had two very different projects disputing the presidency, and if the social democratic project at that moment was the winner, I think we could have a strong effort of social protection in urban outskirts. That was, and these efforts were like being planned for 20 years by a lot of social movements and a lot of social organizations. And at that moment, the church was very linked to these poor communities, and the unionism was strong enough to break a little bit the federal induction of neoliberalism in Brazil. So I think we lost an opportunity there, and in that moment. And as we lost this possibility, I think as our federal regime is not so federal at all, is not so federal, and the central induction for public policies are so relevant. I think we had this kind of changement, and it became clear 10 or 15 years after. So we really, at that moment, divided the country between people who were able to be part of the markets, or the global markets, and people who were not able, and in this sense were superfluous in the country. So I think late 80s was the moment of very distinct projects, and after that we had a strong neoliberalization of our economy and cities, and we could not avoid these processes. But I think it could be different if the federal government at that time was another. And Mona, I agree with you. I have many discussions with my colleagues from urban planning and geography and etc. As many of these intellectuals and activists were part of this social democratic project, they were worried about constructing new laws, new normative regulations and tools and institutional stuff, and they were not at all linked to what was happening in social dynamics in the city. So they were really worried. We were really worried at that moment in constructing the new democracy in Brazil, and we are worried about institutions, of institutional building or institutional projects and etc. And in this sense, we have maybe the most progressist regulation tools of the world, but it is completely disconnected with the social realities of the poor people, and especially the most poor people. So now, in this kind of situation that we live in Brazil that's so difficult, we are talking a lot about this kind of self-criticism and self-understanding that we didn't look at the other side. We were supposing that history is an evolution, and after the dictatorship comes the democracy, and then we will have the participative democracy and etc. And I think we believed in that, and while we were thinking about that, as I said, poor people in the peripheries, we're talking about war, we're talking about Holocaust, and we're talking about crime, and crime as a possibility to change things. And of course, the penal populism, and then the very right-wing movements and etc. had a strong space to work, and they are in power now. So I think it's our fault also.
I didn't get exactly the question you had. I'm sorry, because
I was making the parallel that in each of the three cases, it's not just part of the general population, but it's extremes of the population. Very disenfranchised populations that were being affected, either being totally relocated through clearance, relocation, I call it urban removal, or imposing an urban installation on a community that was going to change up how the dynamics of it worked. And part of those dynamics were drug management, or displacement or relocation, quote unquote, of people into quote unquote better housing in quote unquote better locations. So it's the extreme of those who don't have power against the will of the government.
Yeah, but thank you. I'd rather see that in the two places I've worked with. So there is no regularity and no representation, but there are. It happened that I was asking myself, even the slums and the process are centrally located, are not the poorest people in the city. They are the less poor, which is they have social trajectory very low class, but still they are in the city center. They have access. They know that they won't be displaced, forced. They won't suffer from forced displacement because they place counts in the city, as it has been inverted. The stigma has been inverted. The favela in the core of Rio is important for Rio's image, so they are part of the heritage, the protection of it. So in that way, it's not very representative of 90% of the population which suffers that. And linking the two questions is that in the core area, in the very mediatized areas, civil society or political society, depending on how do you refer to, is acting de facto and doing things de facto. But in the peripheries, they are not there. Academics are not there, or there are few. And then these particular areas, if you do a very systematic analysis of where academics work in Bombay and Rio, you find occurrences of the same place always, which is very difficult and very difficult to justify for us. I mean, I'm including myself because I'm working on that. Because it's easier, it's also calling attention because media is there, because academics are showing this, instead of which academic wants to do an hour and a half to go on the very poor situation in confronting militias or a power which is much more dangerous than the drug trafficker, and the capital is not there. The capital is not there. So I try to figure what entanglements with urban political area between here up. All the players that are financing the capital and institutional, and down the social movement. And you know that if you see now what happened since the last 2 or 3 years, Eike Batista, which is a founder of public national security, local security in Rio, is a very big businessman, as you have here, very very important. Now, all us are now in prison. Now, and all of them, Carioca Engineeria, Odebrecht, half of them acting in Latin America itself, all at the scale of Latin America, have been in prison. So justice is working, you can say, on one side. Then when you go inside this, whole of the NGOs after the buzz led by Olympics, they are gone. They've gone. Only which is staying is the grassroots organization, residents association, linked with local trafficking. So then they do that. They act they act supporting local. But then the major NGOs, Amnesty International, these national scales, and the scholars, they've gone to other places. So I think. But what the point of Lisa Weinstein working in Bombay is very interesting, because she said, urban democracy has never been so democratic. Urban policy has never been so democratic because of the encounters of bourgeois NGOs milieu and popular politics. NGOs making a buzz in national, international media by academic publication in the CT Review and Environment and Urbanization academic review. They are making a buzz. And they are acting themselves as a major former of opinions in the municipal scale, while political society is responding to the local demands. But this is happening only in central places, not in the periphery.
You have to go. But I can answer. I can answer too. You have to see that Algeria is a very specific case because it's a closed country. It's still a closed country. It's not like North Korea, but it's still a closed country. So there is no housing market. Even in Algiers, which is the capital, the first town, the first city in the country. But even in the third one, like Constantine, there is no housing market. There is only two opportunities to have something to live. One is the public or para-public allocations, or individual location and self-building, self-construction. Build of housings is public or half part public. So there is no the same patterns like in Brazil or in India. There is no activist group, foreign activist groups, or there is no NGOs, for instance. And also because that political organization in Algeria is non-democratic. There is one single party which is governing everything. So it's quite different, and because it is a society and a state which is based on oil rent. Every Algerian, I don't know if it's but a lot of people where I discuss with, they think that they have the right to take a part of this oil rent, and one of the unique way they have to take this part is housing. So public housing must be seen as a consequence of the redistribution of oil rent. So there is no market. So there is a sort of deal between society and government, and they each one don't want to go too far. Civil society, because they are aware of this terrible period of civil war and terrorism during the 90s, and the authorities, because even if it is a non-democratic situation, the balance of power is very fragile. So it's very difficult to have a sort of equilibrium. So housing is a sort of money, exchange money between society and state and political authorities. It's quite specific, I guess, all around the world. Maybe in socialist country, former socialist countries like Cuba or even North Korea, I don't know. But there is a sort of like a heritage. Yeah, it's like a heritage of socialism period.
Okay. Thank you very much. Given that at this rate we're going to have more people on the table than in the room, I think it's time to close. So I want to thank you all for coming and thank you all for presenting. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you.